man, excuse me, the first man to give his life for our independence movement. His name is Crispus Attucks. Crispus Attucks was a freed slave who had become a whaler for the merchant marines. Now, Crispus Attucks has a very colorful story, and even the history that I'm giving you right now is sort of briefed out so we can get through it today in the limited time we have. And I'm not here to teach you everything you need to know or can know about Crispus Attucks, but I want to introduce you to Crispus Attucks. And on Friday, I will give you another tidbit of American history of a man or woman who was absolutely essential to the foundation of America. But Crispus Attucks was a whaler for the merchant marines. Now, there's some that argue that he escaped into his freedom. There are others who argue that he obtained his freedom lawfully. It is really kind of irrelevant to our story at this moment, because at this moment in time, he is a free man. And he is working as a whaler for the merchant marines. Now, the merchant marines were docked at the Boston port at this time, and it is 1770 for your chronological information. And Crispus Attucks heard an alarm go off on his ship. He ran up deck to put out the fire, because that's usually what an alarm means, only to find out that there was no fire, but that his own government, the occupying redcoats, had taken up arms against his own people. A crowd of people that began as some young boys mischievously throwing snowballs at some redcoats in uniform. The redcoats had had their fill when one of those snowballs ended up being an ice ball. Christian, you guys have never thrown ice balls at each other, have you? Well, you live in Florida. You did throw ice balls at Colton when you were in California? Yeah. So just as young men might turn their snowballs into ice balls, one of them did and hit a redcoat, and that was all it took. They picked up arms against the growing crowd, which caused the alarm on Crispus Attucks' ship. Crispus Attucks ran back below deck, got 55 of his shipmates, and came out and gave his life in the Boston Massacre. Did I give you that picture? Crispus Attucks confronted those soldiers with a baton and said to them, "Go home. We don't want you here. You don't have cause to pick up arms against us. We don't need you." One thing led to another, and a shot was fired. The shot that was fired struck Crispus Attucks dead. Now there's, like I said, this is the Boston Massacre. Now there is a poem written about Crispus Attucks, and it goes like this. Honor to Crispus Attucks, who was leader and voice that day, the first to die, the first to defy, with Maverick, Carr, and Gray. Call it riot or revolution, his hand first clenched at the crown. His feet were the first in perilous place to pull the king's flag down. His breast, the first one, rent apart, that liberty's stream might flow. For our freedom now and forever, his head was first laid low. Call it riot or revolution or mob or crowd as you may. Such deaths have been the seed of nations. Such lives shall be honored forever. In Crispus Attucks' day, this black man, this free black man, they believed that we would honor his memory forever. As a matter of fact, the Boston Globe would publish that Crispus Attucks' funeral, this free black man, had the highest attendance that Boston had ever seen. Nearly 10,000 people showed up to honor the sacrifice Crispus Attucks made for the liberty and independence of all. Crispus Attucks is buried in a cemetery there in Boston. And I happened to be at that cemetery one day, just a sort of little short personal story for you, and got to be present when a young Black woman was giving a tour of the cemetery. And unfortunately, whether she was not trained or didn't take the time to actually learn, she had no idea the heroes in her presence. Because as she was giving this tour, and this was before CRT, mind you, she tried to slip in about how the white people and the Black people were buried in separate cemeteries, and they would never bury the Black people with the white people. They would never even have their tombstones next to each other, and that the colonists, the rhetoric, the whole bunch of white extremist elite slave owners, right, would never have anything to do with a person of color. Well, as you can imagine, Chrisanne, being as she is, I couldn't sit still and let the people hear that and walk away thinking what she had told them because of her, status as the tour guide as being something true. So I asked her, "Do you know Crispus Attucks?" She said no. I said, "Well, it's very interesting because his tombstone is right over there. You can go see it." Crispus Attucks was a Black man. And then I gave the story that I just told you about the Boston Massacre. And I said, so you see, if you're going to give a history of this cemetery, it might do you well to know the history of this cemetery and some of the people in it. Now, I can tell you she was none amused. As a matter of fact, she was quite put out that I had offered this bit of truth. But I can tell you the people in the tour greatly appreciated the facts that I was able to give. And I'm certain that many of them, because a few of them told me that they were going to go home and learn more about Crispus Attucks and the Boston Massacre.